Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Embers of Rebellion. Episode 8. Chapter 68. Toward the end of the night, everyone had calmed down, and the cleanup began. In spite of the exhaustion and aching feet from standing on them all night, after the incident with my father, the night turned out well. In addition to introducing me to many people, Lucian made an official announcement to the media at the end of the meeting. Therefore, as everything was about to come to an end for the night, I was eager to crawl into bed. However, I noticed Callan lingered a little longer when Lucian came over with Valerian asleep in his arms. "I have people on the way to help with cleaning up, they will be here soon. Come home, I need to get him to bed," Lucian said, leaning down. Lucian pecks my lips when I looked up at him and I smooth down Valerian's hair when Callan walks over to us. "Actually, can I speak with you for a minute?" Callan asked, and my eyes went wide. He wasn't seriously going to tell him, now was he? "Ah sure," Lucian motioned toward a nearby table, but Callan shook his head and reached for Valerian. Lucian watched him, staring oddly at his father while my heart beat frantically in my chest. Callan handed Valerian to me and I grabbed him. Lucian's brows wrinkled, and I could feel his confusion through the bond. "We can stay here for the night," I told Lucian, and he nodded. "Fine, I will be up in a minute, just let me go lock my car back up," he tells his father before walking off. "I didn't mean right now," I hissed at Callan when Lucian was far enough away. "I need to get it over with, it's time Marin. Besides, if I don't do it now, I worry I won't be able to bring myself to do it," he sighed. I chewed my lip, slightly worried about what would happen. Looking toward the car park where Lucian went to lock his car, I sighed before nodding. "I'll get Zoe to watch him for me and I will be back in a minute," I told him, before quickly escaping back to the apartment. Zoe was also setting Casey down to bed when I walked in. Dante was resting on the couch with his head back. "Fun night," Dante chuckled, while shaking his head. "It's about to get worse too," I told him and he sat up, but I shook my head instead, quickly taking Valerian to bed and stripping his shoes off and jacket before tucking him in. He would pitch a fit in the morning about sleeping in his clothes, but right now I had bigger issues to deal with, like the explosion I was expecting when the news of Valerie came out. "Zoe, can you watch him for me for a few minutes?" I asked her while walking back out to the living room. She was removing her shoes and looked over at me. "Of course, is everything all right?" she asked, and no sooner than she said it, did Dante J*RK upright when we heard a thunderous growl that was clearly an alpha's roar of rage. My heart skipped a beat as I ran for the door. Dante, though, was faster, beating me down the steps, and he took off. The door flung against the door with a bang and I cringed at the sound, hoping it didn't wake the kids as I raced across the gardens to the restaurant. Horrified staff stared out the window at the parking lot and Dante shoved through them and out the doors. I gasped when I saw Lucian punching into his father. Callan was on the ground while Lucian rained blow after blow into his face. Blood spraying everywhere, and I pushed past my stunned workers and through the glass doors just as Dante grabbed him, ripping him away from his face, only for Lucian to slam his hands into Dante's chest and launch him, backward and into the side of a car. His body creating an outline in the metal as Dante shook himself out, looking dazed. "Lucian, stop," I called out to him while racing over to him. He snarled and punched his father again, and I grabbed his arm. Callan didn't even fight back and had his arms up, letting his son pummel him. Lucian roared when I grabbed his arm and yanked it back, making me fall backward. I smacked the ground, and I grunted at the impact. The hard ground caused my tailbone to ache. Lucian, stop! I screamed, getting to my feet again and grabbing him. My grip on both his arms, however, was ineffective. Having never seen him so angry before, I was afraid he would kill him. Despite my minimal weight compared to his muscled frame, I shoved him and was pretty sure that I injured myself in the process. I toppled on top of him and he sat up, but I scrambled back and moved in front of Callan as Lucian launched himself at him. In anticipation of the impact, I closed my eyes, but the crash never come when a ferocious growl screamed from him and my eyes opened. The gasp that left me stuttered as I found myself suddenly nose to nose with his wolf form that towered over me. He lifted his paw in the air with claws extended, looking for a kill before they abruptly retracted as he placed the paw on my shoulder. I could feel Callan shaking behind me and Lucian snarled, snapping his teeth at his father's legs. I grabbed his furry head and pulled on his ears to draw his attention away from his father. "Stop," I said in a barely audible whisper after catching sight of his eyes sparkling with tears, and he struck my hands down with a massive paw. He sat up, blood streaming down his face, and Lucian paced in his wolf form to find a way past me to reach his father. However, I knew he wouldn't attack me to get to him. Chapter 69. "I'm sorry, son," Callan choked out and groaned. Turning my head, I looked at him. Callan's face was so swollen he was barely recognizable. He coughed before placing his fingers in his mouth and removing a tooth. Lucian's answer was a growl when I helped Callan to stand. The sound of cracking bones reached my ears as I heard Lucian shift back behind me. Keeping a grip on Callan, who was unsteady on his feet, we moved toward his car, and I fished his keys out of his pocket and unlocked his car for him. "I'm all right, dear. Go, check on my son," he hissed, falling heavily in his seat. With a nod, I turned to find Lucian had walked back to his car. "Lucian!" I called, and he turned to look at me as I walked over to him. The look he gave me made me stop. You knew, and said nothing," he said and bit the inside of my lip and nodded. Hurt shone in his eyes as Lucian looked at the hotel. "She gave you this place, didn't she?" he asked. My lips quivered as he turned his gaze back to me. "She recognized your son," I told him, and he sucked in a deep breath. "You should have told me," he said, and I could feel his heart breaking, the sadness for a loss he didn't actually lose all those years, the sinking feeling that I betrayed him. "Lucian, wait. Just let me." He got in his car and slammed the car in reverse, smacking into the brick garden out front of the main office before tearing out of the driveway. The engine of his car roared as he floored it down the street. "I take it that is what you meant when you said it would get a lot worse," Dante said as I rubbed my arms against the cool breeze. He stopped beside me with a groan while rubbing his lower back, and Callan pulled out of the parking space before winding down his window. "He will forgive you. It's me he is truly angry at," Callan said with a sigh. I nodded and watched him leave. 3 days later. The only time I had heard from Lucian was via text message. 3 days had passed, and he was still angry at me. I knew he spent most of those days drunk. Could feel the unease sitting in my stomach through the bond. Standing out front of the school, Valerian and I waited for him to come to get him, yet the feeling through the bond was like he was passed out and asleep. In no way was I letting my son go with him if he was drunk. Therefore, I hoped it was just my guilt for not telling him sooner. "What time is it?" Valerian asked me, looking both ways down the street for his father's car. Retrieving my phone from my pocket, I glanced at the time and sighed. He was almost an hour late. "He will come," he promised on the phone, Valerian said while nodding his head and walking back to the bench seat that sat in front of the school. I wandered over to him and sat next to him. Maybe he is in traffic, Valerian said, fidgeting with his fingers. How about we ring him when we get home? Maybe he is busy, but he promised he would be here, Valerian said while looking at me teary-eyed. He had been asking for his father since the morning after the Alpha meeting. Asking where he was and when he could see his father, and I kept making up excuses. Did you have a fight? He asked, and I turned to look at him. You did. You upset him and made him leave us, didn't you? No, he is upset about his mother, I tell him, and his eyebrows furrow. But Nana died years ago? And people stay sad for a long time, I tried to explain. Well, you can take me to him, Valerian said, hopping up and walking toward the car. I tried to ring Lucian on the short walk back to my truck, but he didn't pick up. I don't think he is home. We can try to ring him when we get back home. No. He promised me. I want to see him. I want my dad. Valerian screamed at me. Startled at his outburst, I stared at him before pulling myself together and kneeling beside him, wiping the tears that streaked down his cheeks. Valerian, I don't think you should see him right now. Your father needs time, I tell him, but he shakes his head. What if he needs me, please, Mum? Please, Valerian begged, and I dropped my head and pinched the bridge of my nose. I sighed before looking back at his big amber eyes filled with tears. Fine, but we just knock, and if he doesn't answer, we go home, I tell him, and he nods. Valerian bounced on his heels excitedly and raced toward my car, climbing in the back and buckling himself in. Jumping into the driver's seat, we headed to his hotel. The regret I felt upon stepping out of that elevator was instant. No guards stood in the corridor, yet the smell of liquor had Valerian pinching his nose. Grabbing his arm, I tried to steer him back into the elevator when he took off, racing down the hall. I chased after him when he pushed inside the door that was wide open. Dad! Dad! Valerian screams excitedly before he falls silent. Rushing through the door, I could see Valerian standing in the hall, where it opens up to the living room. Valerian looked over his shoulder at me before looking back into the mess. Glass crunched under his shoes as he walked off in search of his father. Valerian, wait, I called, trying to catch up to him, only to stop when I walked in and saw it for myself. Broken glass lay everywhere, the couches were upturned, and the china was broken, blood spatter was on the walls, and the place looked like it had been burgled. I followed the sounds coming from Valerian before finding him standing in the doorway to the bathroom. Dad! Valerian murmured, and I gripped his shoulder only to find Lucian passed out on the tiled floor. What's wrong with him? Valerian asked, looking around at the mess. I could tell that now he had found his father. He was on the verge of a meltdown as he took in all the mess and the state of him. How about I ring Pop, and you stay with him for the night while I look after Daddy, okay? I asked him as he shook. His eyes teared up, and he glanced over at his father on the floor. His entire body was shaking, and he nodded his head before stepping into the bathroom and leaning down to shake his father's shoulder. Dad? I heard him murmur, and his father groaned but didn't wake. Valerian leaned down and kissed his cheek. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I called Callan, who said he was on his way over to collect Valerian for me. Once he had, I walked back into the house before cleaning the place. Furious that he let it get this way, knowing full well what his son was like. The place was trashed and stunk like a brewery. Sweeping up the glass and mopping the floor, I then walked back into the bathroom. Now that the hall was clear of glass, I dragged him to his room. It took me 20 minutes to lift him onto the bed. He groaned and mumbled but never woke, and by the time I was done, I was absolutely livid. I drove all the way back to the hotel, fuming, and snatched the letter and the keys from his mother out of the safe before driving back. There was no excuse for breaking his son's heart as he did. Fair enough, he was pissed at me, but Valerian didn't deserve to see him like that, and I also blamed myself for bringing him here. About an hour later, I had found all the liquor bottles in the place and started tipping them down the drain when a hungover Lucian stumbled out, bumping into the TV unit and clutching his head in his hands. Ignoring him, I continued pouring the bottles down the sink when he rubbed his eyes. "Marin," he questioned, seeming confused before his eyes blew wide. "What day is it?" he asked. "Monday, you were supposed to pick Valerian up," I told him, trying to keep the anger out of my tone. He muttered before he groaned and clutched his hair, banging on the side of his head with his fists. "Why are you here?" he asked, staggering to the kitchen counter before falling onto a stool. He dropped his head onto his arms. "Did you not hear me? You were supposed to pick him up, but instead we came here and found you passed out on the floor in the bathroom." His head whipped up from his arms. "Wait, Valerian was here?" he asked, and I glared at him. "Yes, you promised him, then he walked into this place looking like a SHT with you drunk." "He saw me?" Valerian asked, and the feeling through the bond was guilt and panic as he looked around the room for him. "Where is he?" he asked, getting up and rushing to his son's room. "He is not here. Your father has him," I told him, and he froze before snarling and turning on his heel and stalking toward me. "You let him take him?" he growled angrily. "Yes, because he asked for you and you were unavailable. I understand you're upset, but don't punish your son for it, Lucian," I told him, walking over to my handbag. I rummaged for the letter Valerie sent to me for him after her death. Her handwriting was on the front. I swallowed the lump that formed in my throat, and tears pricked my eyes just thinking of her before I turned around. Chapter 70. She always watched, you just didn't know. She watched you your entire life. Don't let her down by having to watch you destroy yourself, I tell him before thrusting the letter at him. He takes it, reading his name on the front. "What's this?" "From Valerie, it arrived in the mail a couple of weeks after her funeral along with a few others," I told him, and he turned it over between his fingers. After shaking my head, I grabbed my bag from the counter and headed for the door. "She's dead, Marin. He kept her from me, and now she's dead," he said, and I stopped. Tears burned my eyes as I stopped and turned to face him. "She is only dead if you believe she is. That hotel is her legacy, hers. All those women and the rogues? She helped build that. I hated your father for so long and what he did to her, I may never forgive him for that, but if he hadn't, none of that would exist. All those people, she gave them their lives back, that hotel gave them their lives back. She isn't dead, Lucian. Everything I am, Zoe is, Macy, your son, is her. Gone, yes, but she is not because no one will forget what she has given to us," I told him. Lucian shook his head before falling back onto the stool. He clutched his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook as he broke down. "He lied, all those years he lied to me," Lucian cried, and I chewed my lip to stop it quivering before walking over to him. I ran my fingers through his hair before taking the letter from him. He looked at me, and I placed it in my handbag. "What are you doing? Come with me," I told him, and he shook his head. "I want to show you something," I tell him, pulling on his hand. "But first, you need to get dressed, you stink," I tell him, groaning as I pull him to his feet, and he chuckles. He sniffles and tries to kiss me, but I pull away. Did you make out with an Ari? I asked him. That bad? He asked, and I nodded, pushing him toward the bathroom. I turned the shower on, and he pulled his clothes off. After retrieving him a towel and fresh clothes, I sat next to the sink basin. I messaged Callan and checked on Valerian, who he said was asleep. When Lucian got out, he changed, smelling and looking like the man I loved. So, where are we going? He asked as I retrieved my bag and keys. You'll see, I told him, leading him down to my car, his mother's old car. This was hers, wasn't it? He asked, stepping aside and staring at it. Biting the inside of my lip, I nodded before chuckling. She taught Zoe how to drive in this thing. It's why it has a dent in the back, I chuckled, pointing it out. He looked at the back tailgate at the pole mark, where she reversed into it. I almost crushed it, he whispered. But you didn't. Good thing too. All the letters were in the glove compartment, I told him before climbing in. Lucian hopped in beside me as I started her up. He stared vacantly out the window for most of the drive. What was she like? He asked as we pulled up at my hotel. I'll show you, I told him, climbing out of the car. Lucian's brows furrowed, but he reluctantly got out. Grabbing his hand, I walked him around to the storage sheds at the far back of the property closest to the reserve. Digging through my bag, I retrieved the keys I got earlier when I went home to grab the letter. I unlocked the padlock and kicked the slide lock. It wasn't until after she passed and I was going through her things that I realized why your father was so afraid to have her by his side. This is who your mother was, I told him, lifting the roller door. The shutter groaned as it rolled and banged open. Leaning in, I flicked on the lights. The fluorescent lights blinked before buzzing, staying on, lighting up the huge shed. Lucian gasped and stepped inside, and I followed behind him. The room was not only filled with all her belongings but her past. Your mother came from a wealthy family. This hotel was the first one built in Mountain View City. The city was built around it. Valerie's father refused to join any pacts as they formed around the city. I told him as he looked around the place. All this is hers, he asked, looking back at me, and I nodded. Valerie had a lot of secrets, most I kept close to me, ones I never knew, but she trusted me with after her death. After her parents passed, they left her this place, your father discovered her, and they had you, but because of all this, and the uproar she caused in her younger years, your father worried about it damaging his reputation, I told him, glancing at all the banners that hang from the walls. The posters and huge blown pictures of all the rallies she attended. She wasn't a rogue like everyone thought. I believed she was like me. It wasn't until she died that I understood what she meant when she said me and her were the same. She was mislabeled like me. She allowed everyone to see her that way, but she wasn't. Your mother was an activist. An activist for the rogues, and all this and the hotel were all hers. Her legacy and what she fought for. I told him, grabbing a picture off the wall. I handed it to him. It was a blown-up newspaper clipping, Valerie front and center leading the protest with her banner held high, passing him another. It was of her standing on the roof of a cop car to rally her troops. She stopped when she fell pregnant with you. Everyone eventually forgot. Then I met her, and she met her grandson, and she started fighting all over again, only this time instead of fighting in the streets, she gave the rogues a home, and she asked me to continue it, I told him, looking around at the memories that were once hers. Moving to the back, I grabbed an old scrapbook. It was old and heavy, filled with every news clipping of her son, and at the back were photos of every event he attended that she snuck into. Grabbing the other down, it was of him growing up. I handed it to him, and he looked down at them before moving to clear off a box. I stood off to the side and watched him open it. She always watched Lucian. She was there, you just didn't know it. Lucian nodded, turning the pages. I handed him back his letter before giving him the key. I will let you look. Just lock up when you're done. I tell him before pressing my lips to his shoulder. You kept it all these years, he asked, and I looked over at him. My lips quivered, and I cleared my throat. This place always reminded me of her. Yes, because she wasn't just your mother, Lucian. For a while, she was also mine. Lucian nodded and turned back to the scrapbook. I smiled sadly before turning and walking back to my apartment, wiping my tears as I went. Chapter 71. I wasn't sure how late it was when Lucian came in, but I felt him slip into bed beside me before snuggling into my back. Although when I woke up, he was gone, his side of the bed was cold, and I wondered what time he got up and left. I did, however, notice Valerie's knot had been opened because it sat on the bedside table. Picking it up, I placed it back in its envelope before tucking it away in the top drawer where it wouldn't get ruined. Racing around, I quickly got dressed for work. Dante had taken Casey to school for Zoe. She was also running around getting changed, hopping on one foot as she slipped her shoe on because both of us were already late. Callan had already taken Valerian to school. Callan had sent me a picture of Valerian and him at the school gate, so the only thing I had to do today was pick him up when he finished. In the meantime, I had never-ending work at the hotel, having fallen behind in recent days with all the added drama. With the cleanup and multiple rooms that needed cleaning after the place was packed last night, I was already exhausted just thinking about my never-ending list. With a groan, I dragged myself down to the restaurant, knowing that was the first major task, taking inventory to order new stock in. However, Zoe came rushing in halfway through, scaring the living daylights out of me when she squealed loudly. "Evie, come quick, you have to see this," she gushed excitedly, waving me to follow her. I held up my notepad, but she was practically bouncing on her heels with excitement. Placing my notepad down with a sigh, I followed her into the staff lunchroom, which was packed and full of staff members as they crowded around the small TV in here when they should be working. "What, Jesus, Zoe, I have things to do," I whined at her when she reached over and grabbed my hand, ripping me to the front as she pushed past everyone. My feet halted when I saw the TV screen. Looking for the remote, I noticed Sarah had it and took it from her, turning the news up. A reporter stood out in front of the rogue primary school, and huge buses were lined up along the road. The news reporter stood between them, but what was most shocking was Lucian standing in the background talking to men in construction uniforms. My brows furrowed, wondering what he was doing at the school when the new anchor woman started speaking. Recently I received some news that Alpha Lucian has made a significant turn for the better, or so he claims. It is not just that he accepted a rogue as a mate, he has opened all of his borders to the rogues, permitting them to pass through or even move into his territory. Alpha Lucian stated that other alphas should accept change and follow by opening up the borders. As you can see behind me, he has also gone a step further and has accepted all students from this rundown school and welcomed them into Tehi-Pak schools on his territory. His bizarre behavior is believed to be a result of learning the son of his rogue mate, who he also claims is his own, attends this school, the woman said. She then prattled about some other crap he was supposedly up to and how I managed to fool the alpha with outlandish claims that Valerian was his. Turning, I looked at all my staff when Zoe shook my arm. Did you know? She asked. I shook my head. I had no idea whatsoever. He left this morning without telling me where he was going. I knew he said he would open up the borders, but, I shake my head, trying to wrap my head around the news, it seemed too good to be true. That's not all, he is turning the old school into a homeless shelter, Dante rang me this morning. This morning, Lucian also put a statement out for any rogues looking for work, telling them they could apply through all his personally owned businesses as well, welcoming them to apply for any positions available on his pack land, Zoe exclaimed. We also had workers out at the commune this morning, Sarah said behind her, making me turn to look at her. Construction workers? I asked. Yes, they were ripping the fences down that bordered on his pack and said they were building a road into the place, Sarah tells me. I blink, unsure what to say, turning back to the TV. It was footage of kids lining up to get on the buses to go to their new school. About time, things changed around here. If only the other packs would adopt this change as well, Sarah murmured, and I looked at Zoe and chewed my lip. Maybe we can make them. I tell her, and her brows furrow. I'm no longer rogue, I am a Luna of the city now. I can petition the council, remove the laws. Girl, do you have any idea how hard that is? I looked into that years ago. You need to have at least council member signatures on that, and as far as I can tell, you will only get 2, yours and Lucian's. The other 3 packs won't agree, and no way your father will sign after the dramas last night, Sarah tells me, and I sigh. Alpha Nixon and his wife definitely won't sign, I murmur to myself, so that only left one other Alpha and Luna, so I would still be a signature short, and that is if they agreed. Not to mention you need them to agree before you can even bring it before the council members. You can bring it forth, but that doesn't mean they will agree to hear it, let alone call in a meeting over it, Macy says, getting up from her spot on the small sofa, also thinking. We will find a way. First, I have to petition for it anyway, which will take a couple of days. No, first you need to let Lucian mark you. You aren't Luna until he does, Macy tells me with a smirk on her face. Right, that too, I guess. I admit. Suddenly feeling nervous, though I knew I didn't need to be, old anxieties were hard to let go of. Yet looking back at the TV screen, there is no one else I would rather be tied to than my mate. Chapter 72. Lucian. Few hours earlier waking up, my thoughts were all over the place. Marin was still asleep beside me, but I didn't want to wake her. Rolling over, I spotted the letter from my mother. The storage shed was a real eye-opener for me. The struggles she faced. My father growing up, had never once said a bad word about her, only that she was Omega and he loved her. He never mentioned she refused to conform to our way of life, he never told me she was one of the original rogues this land was taken from. Going through the storage locker, I was in there for hours. This entire city belonged to her family. In search of a better future for their daughter. My grandparents sold pieces of it off, selling it to the different packs that now resided here under the promise that it would create a better future for their daughter, my mother. Only it did the opposite, and they were thrust into the middle of a turf war over the very turf they owned. Once theirs only to be turned into what it is today. 2 generations of fighters. My grandparents wanted the city to remain free for those to live without the sanctions the packs brought forth. Instead, the city turned into a prison, one ruled by the packs that brought the land out, promising to maintain my grandparents' way of life, only they didn't. Instead, they stripped them from it. Looking at Marin, it was a similar circumstance, stripped bare of everything she thought she would have only to end up placed within the sanctions of the packs that surrounded us. A future set to repeat because of greed and blindness to what they were forcing on those less fortunate to endure. My own son was forced to watch his mother fight and claw her way to the top. My mother was remarkable in her fight to bring freedom back, and looking at Marin, I now understood why she fought the bond the way she did. Marin has all the makings of an excellent Luna. However, my father messed up, believing my mother would harm his reputation and break the pack alliances. He was wrong. She would have brought about change, and she would have been unstoppable force like Marin would be with me by her side. Now, I understand what all the fuss was about. All the trepidation and fight. Marin wasn't just fighting for the rogues, for my mother or herself, she was fighting for the future, for our son. Picking up my mother's letter, I opened it and pulled it from the envelope, finally finding the courage to read it. For my son, if you are reading this, it means my time has come and gone. I know you must have some questions, pent-up anger towards your father, just know I forgave him. As time passed, and so did the years I watched you grow from the shadows, and he did a pretty good job, you turned out all right, turned into the alpha in which you were intended to be. Years I longed to hide you, the only way I could was in my heart, but no, I did try. I fought for you even if it was from the sidelines, I always watched, and I held on to the hope I would meet you in person again one day. However, now obviously, it won't be in this lifetime. Don't feel bad for me, don't feel sad. So with that, I leave you my most incredible gift of all. Your Luna and your son. I may not have had the gift to raise you, but I have watched her grow, watched her fight, and she will. Watched her become a mother to your son, my grandson. Go easy on her, she has a lot of anger towards not just you but the system in which we all live. She will fight when the time comes, and I just hope it's by your side and not against you. I'm sorry, son, she will win. Tell that girl she can't, and she will prove you wrong. You don't want to go to war with her, you could try to tear everything from her, but it won't work. War burns bridges while that woman builds them, just like my hotel. I had lost all hope until she wandered onto my doorstep. I recognized Valerian the moment I laid eyes on him. He reminded me so much of you, and it was like I was given a second chance at the one thing I missed with you. She gave me drive and reason to keep fighting. When I met Marin and our sweet boy Valerian, I was on borrowed time. Waiting for my life to end, yet finding them, I invited them in and gave them a place to stay. In return, I not only gained a grandson, but a daughter. For years, this place resembled how my life felt, broken and hopeless. They gave me life, gave me back my home and my fight. So, in turn, I gave her everything, everything I owned. I would say your father wasn't too pleased with that knowledge, but he would understand why in time. Now I know you are probably furious that your father lied to you all these years, just know it was a different time, and I came with a lot of past and baggage. He saw me as a challenge, he wasn't totally to blame, though. I was a wild one, yet he loved me still, and I couldn't let go of the anger or my home. When he took you from me, that was the worst and most harrowing day of my life. For a while, he would bring you to see me until you started questioning, so I was a pan of some of your earliest memories, but my hatred for what he did overrode my reasoning. Don't blame him entirely, we both made choices we shouldn't have. It is as much my fault as it was his. You were deprived of a mother, I lost a son, but he lost his mate, his Luna, because his reputation was on the line. That was his loss and mine. I have realized over the years that anger and hatred grow and it slowly destroys us. So let it go. It does no good to dwell in the past, instead look forward to the future or what it can be if you allow it. Hatred and anger do nothing but rot your insides, Lucian, so let it go. He was your father and still is. I know he regretted my passing, regrets his mistakes. But that's where history can change. Our past actions are a lesson for the future, so with that, take those lessons from us, don't blame, don't hate, rejoice that you found Marin and Valerian. Don't let this be your biggest regret, don't rule by emotion, rule with a level head, and make sure it is with your family by your side. I am proud to say I may have rubbed off on her a little. Marin is strong, stubborn but with a heart of gold. She will lead you along or astray. She will break you down and peel back the layers before she rebuilds you like she did me. I was never one for emotion. She knew that, but even I caught myself in awe of her ability to adapt, morph, and change herself into the woman she is. Valerian, too, I can see he will grow to be a great alpha one day, and hopefully, you will be pan of the reason he is. So don't let this knowledge of my existence tarnish what you have, don't let this be the blood alpha's regret. Let it be the change that is so needed in this city. Love them, and you will not owe my gain a Luna and a son but a family and home. She built her village, I just hope she lets you be a pan of it. So with that, I am sorry for not being a pan of your life like I wished I was. Just know I love you, and I always will. Love Mum X. Placing the letter on the bedside table, I sat up and pulled my clothes on before leaning down and kissing Marin's cheek. I owed her this much, I thought as I got dressed and slipped out of the apartment. By the time I had organized buses and pulled all my men from border patrols. It was nearly midday, and poor Dante had been run off his feet as I gave him orders and a never-ending list of tasks for the day. I pulled up at the school and walked in with Dante to find Valerian. Valerian squealed loudly when I walked into his classroom and rushed over to me. Dante scooped Casey up and held her upside down by one foot, jiggling her like a tea bag while she squealed loudly. The teacher stops her lesson and looks over at us, interrupting her class. "Can I help you, Alpha?" she asked. "Yes, tell the kids to pack up, I have already spoken to the principal." "The school is moving," I told her, and she turned, picking up the small phone when students started flooding the halls led by their teachers. Valerian's teacher jumped when the phone started ringing in her hand. She answered, and I could hear the principal telling her what was going on. "What's going on, Dad?" Valerian whispered as he watched the students gather what little belongings they had as the teacher directed them. "I'm sorry, you saw me like that, buddy," I tell him, and he drops his head. I pepper kisses all over his face, and he stands giggling, pushing my face away. "Do you forgive me?" I asked him, and he wrapped his arms around my neck. "Always," he mumbled, and I sucked in a shaky breath and rubbed his back. "Are you shutting my school down?" Valerian asked while pulling away and looking at everyone leaving out the door. "What about my friends? Where will they go?" he asked. "With you to your new school," I tell him, and his brows furrowed. "But they are still rogue, Dad, they can't go to a pack school like Casey and me." "What about Taylor?" Valerian pouted. "Taylor is coming. Your village just got a hell of a lot bigger, you're letting them come to the school in your pack?" "I'm doing more than that. I am letting them join our pack," I whispered to him before kissing his cheek and heading out the doors toward the buses. Chapter 73. Marin. Finally, everything was back in order, and I decided that I couldn't put it off any longer. Since Valerian was with his father for a few more hours, I decided I would go out to the reserve and shift. After everything with the Forsaken and the missing rogues, I had been putting it off because I promised I would take Valerian with me next time. Yet, as much as I wanted to keep that promise, it wasn't a promise I could keep without putting him at risk. However, it had been ages since I shifted, and I was also nervous about what I knew would be an excruciating transformation. Going through the gate, I pulled my small backpack off my shoulder before glancing around nervously. This place was too quiet today, far too quiet, and it set my sense on edge, yet I was already here, and I needed to do this as much as I was dreading it. I removed my clothes and quickly tucked them into my backpack and stuffed it inside a hollow log. The shift took longer than usual, but surprisingly, it wasn't as painful. I flexed my claws in the moist soil and stretched out before running deeper into the forest. One thing I noticed though, my wolf form didn't tire as fast, and after half an hour where I would usually be dead on my feet and dragging me out of the forest, I was keen to keep going. I suppose I had marking Lucian to thank for that. In spite of that, my wolf was still a tiny wolf and not what you would expect from an alpha female. After another hour, I was about to turn around when I heard the sounds of a whimper. My ears pricked and twitched on top of my head when I tried to find where the noise was coming from. When I heard it again, the breeze switched, and the soft scent of blood reached my nose. My eyes scanned the trees as I followed my nose. There was a scent that I swear I had smelled before, but I couldn't place it. I just knew it was a rogue scent. However, the next whimper I heard couldn't be mistaken that someone was in trouble, and I picked up my pace, sniffing the ground and air while listening, looking for any indication of where they were. I was becoming dangerously close to the boundary line that led into Forsaken territory, a place I hoped I wouldn't have to venture out to. Yet the choking cough I heard next had me running toward the high fences, and my eyes blew wide when I saw a pair of Forsaken ripping into something on the ground. The scent of blood reached my nose stronger, and I quickly identified where I had smelled that particular scent before. Bile rose in my throat as I tried to find a way through the fence. Racing along it, trying to find a gap big enough for me to squeeze through, or I would have to climb it and risk being torn to pieces by the razor wire that ran along the top. My growl was surprisingly louder as I snarled at the two Forsaken tearing into her, trying to draw their attention to me and away from her. If I left and came back, she would be long before I got help, and I cursed myself not letting Lucian mark me because we would have the mind link, and my phone was tucked in my bag closer to the hotel. One of the Forsaken looked in my direction before growling as my paws hit the fence when I felt the bottom of the fence pull away slightly from the ground, the mesh flimsy in this section. I started digging, my claws ripping into the soft earth as I tried to dig under the fence and create a hole just big enough to squeeze through. Yet my wolf form was still too big for the gap when I shifted back, my bones snapping painfully as adrenaline shot through me, and I forced the shift too quickly, making it increasingly painful, and I was about to shove my head and shoulder under before quickly turning, knowing my neck would be too exposed. "Hang on, Emily," I called, forcing my legs under the fence and grabbing the mesh with my fingers while on my back. I forced myself under the fence. The wire scratched and cut into me when I heard a snarl just as I laid flat on my back, attempting to shimmy under it. My teeth sank into my legs before I was suddenly ripped through it by one of the Forsaken grabbing me. My face, torso, and arms were all cut by the wire. I screamed as it tore into my leg. I kicked my other leg out, hitting its head before trying to shift back as I pivoted, only for it to sink its teeth into the side of my torso. Grabbing the mesh fence with one hand, my other came in contact with a rock. I gripped it and swung, smashing into the top of its head as hard as I could. It let go of my leg and shook its head, and I swung again, not giving it a chance to get its bearings, smashing the rock repeatedly into its head, blood coating my skin on the back spray as I caved its skull in and nearly made myself sick at what I did. Its dying whimper received the other one's attention, and my eyes widened when it snarled and rushed at me. My heart pounded as it hurled itself at me, all teeth and claws going for the kill. My panic forced the shift quickly as I ran at it. Our bodies collide in a mess of fur, claws, and teeth. Memories of pack training, things I thought I would have surely forgotten after all these years, kicked in as we fought. The Forsaken was ripping into me, but being smaller, I was able to move a little bit more efficiently, escaping some lethal blows just in the nick of time and aiming my teeth and claws at the softer tissue of his torso, tearing into him piece by piece, slowly weakening him. His teeth sink my hip and I sunk my teeth into his armpit and fore-chest, which made him let go. I pivoted, sinking my teeth into his stomach above his GH and shaking my head. He bounces back before staggering, his intestines and organs protruding from the wound I gave him, and I knew I had no time to waste. I immediately gripped onto his neck and shook my head. His body fell limply on the ground, and I panted, trying to catch my breath when I heard a GR0AN making me spin. Shifting as I raced to Emily, who was lying in the dirt in her human form. I skidded along the ground mid-shift, grazing my hands and knees as I stopped beside her, gripping her shoulders. Her hands were clutching the back of her neck as she lay twisted on her side. The Forsaken had torn into her pretty severely and appeared to have been eating her. It was almost as if she was too weak to go on and had collapsed, and they had stumbled upon her thinking she was a leisurely meal in her weakened state. Rolling her onto her back, she whimpered, and her eyes flew open. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair matted. She blinked rapidly, and her eyes rolled into her head. "Marin," she murmured, and I looked over her body, trying to figure out how I would get her back through the fence. "Right here, I'm right here," I try to tell her, looking around for something that would aid us. "You need to get my son," she murmurs, and I look at her. "Where is Eric, Emily? Where is he?" I ask her, looking around for any sign of her son. "The facility," Emily gasped. "I have to get my son," she whispered, and her eyes rolled into her head. I shook her, gripping her shoulders, trying to rouse her awake. "What facility, Emily? Where is he?" I asked, and her lips that were cracked and bleeding moved, but no sound came out. Her face burned and blistered from the sun, told me she had been out here for a while. "Emily," I said, shaking her before cursing when she fell unconscious. Grabbing her under the arms, I started dragging her toward the fence. If I could roll her under at least to that side, I could go for help, but she would be left open for prey on this side if I ran for help. I dragged her toward the fence before making the hole I was digging bigger and, using my feet, pushed her under while lifting the mesh as much as I could by pulling it toward me. Using my hands, I started pushing her so I could squeeze under next when I heard growls behind me, and I froze. Emily was now safe on the other side of the fence while I was still in the Forsaken territory. I turned my head to see 3 Forsaken stalking toward me, teeth bared. I frantically started pushing her, hoping to get under before they reached me. Forcing my head and shoulders under the fence, I was just pulling myself through when I felt teeth sink into both my ankles. I screamed, gripping onto Emily's unconscious body as they tried ripping me back under the fence, my fingers slipping, and I tried to turn to grip the fence when another set of teeth sank into me, and I was ripped back under the fence at an alarming speed and tossed. My scream of agony made my ears ring as I got to my hands and knees, only for one of them to pounce on my back and start tearing into me. Chapter 74. Lucian, walking up the steps to Marin's apartment, I push the door open and call out to her. "Marin." I got no answer, and Valerian ducked off to his room, and I could hear Zoe coming up the steps behind me. Walking through the place, I walk into her room to find her uniform on the bed. As I walked back to the living room, Zoe walked in, dumping Casey's stuff on the table. "Have you seen Marin?" She didn't answer when I rang on my way here, I asked her. No, she was in the restaurant earlier, I thought she would be here. Zoe shrugged. Maybe ask Tatum, wasn't he on guard duty today? Zoe asked while flicking the kettle on. No, he had to go to a border patrol meeting today, I tell her when Zoe picks up her phone. Ah, she has gone on a run at the reserve, Zoe says, and I walk over, snatching the phone from her fingertips. The text message was sent 2 hours ago. My heart skips a beat, knowing the borderlines aren't secure. Watch Valerian, I tell her, taking off and jumping over the guardrail on the balcony. Landing on the ground, I raced toward the back end of the hotel. I had been ringing her for over 2 hours. She shouldn't have been gone that long, she told me herself. She can't last long in her wolf form. I ran for the back of the property and heard Zoe call out to me, but I didn't stop. Instead, I hit the gate that hard. It flew open and smashed into the fence. Sniffing the air for any sign of her as I run. I find her scent coming to a log before reaching into it and pulling out her bag. I opened up the mind link, ordering all my men to this side of the border to find her as I frantically looked between the trees. Marion! I scream out to her. My chest squeezes painfully as something feels like it is tugging, goosebumps rising on my arms, and I just know something terrible has happened. I didn't even get 3 steps before the shift took over, and I was racing through the forest, looking for any sign of her. Cursing myself that she wasn't marked because I would have found her in seconds. Partway through the woods, I heard a scream, and my stomach dropped. Adrenaline courses through me as I raced toward the sound, her screams becoming louder and the sounds of snarls and fighting reach my ears. I skidded into the fence, my paws digging into the earth as I slammed against it. 3 Forsaken were tearing into her, and she was covered in blood as she tried to shift. Racing along the fence line, I try to find a way out when she yelps, shifting when a brown matted one rips into her neck, flinging her across the dirt. Backing up, I look at the fence, coils of razor wire wrapping around the top. I shift back before backing up further and running at the fence, grabbing the mesh with my fingers and climbing the mesh before jumping over the top. The wire tangled around my arms, torso, and legs. Tearing at my flesh, I felt it drag across my entire body before my weight ripped me to the other side. My entire body sliced to pieces as I hit the ground mid-shift. My paws hit the dirt, and I growled viciously, the sound more of a roar. They freeze, all spinning toward the new intruder, and my eyes went to Marin, who was trying to crawl away. One of her legs was broken, her shin bone jutting out past her skin, and I couldn't see a clear speck of flesh that wasn't drenched in blood. The Forsaken turned their full attention on me, snapping and snarling as they tried to circle around me. Not giving them time, I attacked, ripping into one while the other 2 ripped into me. I barely felt their bites as I pulled them apart, utterly numb with my rage as I tore into the brown one's neck and shook my head. Fur and blood flying everywhere, including mine, coated the ground. I could feel my men getting closer as I *LLED the first one before pivoting and sinking my teeth into another one's face, tearing his ear off before biting his muzzle. The crunch of teeth breaking and his blood getting into my mouth made me lock my jaw while the other tore into my side and back leg, trying to get me off him. His wails and screams echoed when I felt his jaw snap and pop. I let go, turning on the other and ripping into his rear hind leg, the bone cracking between my teeth under pressure, and I shook my head. He yelped and howled as I ripped his leg off just as the other one hit me from the side. He had no control of his jaw as it hung limply. I tore into his neck, slamming him down into the ground before tearing a chunk out just as snarls echoed through the air. Tatum was running toward us, and I gasped when I saw John's giant grey wolf lock its jaws around the Forsaken's neck, snapping it in one bite before he repeatedly slammed it on the ground. My men come from everywhere. Blood drenched me, my wounds weren't healing quick, but I had one aim, and that was Marin. Rushing toward her, I find her leg was indeed broken, her side torn open severely. I started licking her wounds, and she pushed my face away. "Stop, you're injured," she said, pushing my head with her hand, and I snapped at her fingers, ignoring her. "Tatum, help Emily," Marin cried, and I lifted my head from her hip to see her point toward the fence line. Tatum rushed over, and I saw my men help him rip at the panel to get to her. Marin's hand dropped, and so did the rest of her as she passed out, almost as if her body just gave up on her now she knew she was safe. I keep licking her wounds, sealing them, so they stop bleeding before shifting back when I notice her father comes over. He sniffed her neck, and I snarled at him before scooping her up in my arms. He also shifts back, looking everywhere but at his daughter's body in my arms. I tuck her closer. "What are you doing here?" I growled at him. "Your men rushed out of the meeting, I figured something had happened and followed," he snapped back at me. His eyes go to Marin's face, her head falling back in my arms. "She going to be all right?" he asked before clenching his jaw and looking away. "She will be," I tell him, turning my back on him and stalking off to the pulled-down fence. "Get your men to fix that fence, John, they were supposed to be on patrol today," I called over my shoulder. He growls but says nothing as I step through into the reserve. One of my men scoops up Emily, and I stop. "She good?" "No idea," he says. "The girl didn't look too good." "Get her to the pack hospital," I tell him, and he takes off running with her. Already mind link for ambulances. They will be waiting out front. I told Dante to hang back for them. "He is out there flagging them down," Tatum says, and I nod before looking at my other men. "Guard the fence until John's men get here to fix it," I command. "Yes, boss," I hear them say just before I take off running. Chapter 75. Lucian. I placed Marin in the waiting ambulance, ordering Dante to watch Valerian for me since he remained behind with Zoe. Once we got to the hospital, Emily was placed in an induced coma. They had no idea what was wrong with her, just know that Forsaken saliva was poisonous. The amount of bacteria they carried had baffled us for years. We weren't sure what changed in their DNA once made Forsaken, which is part of the reason our city rarely banishes those out. Marin was slowly healing and had drips coming out of her everywhere and antibiotics. The infection ravaging her body was mild, and the few wounds I received had already healed. I had noticed that Forsaken bites had never really affected me, something to do with the genetic mutation in my bloodline, which was now shared with Valerian. Marin, however, didn't share it, although her marking me seemed to have some effect on her ability to heal a little quicker, whereas Emily was knocking at death's door. One of the pack doctors came in. He was an older man around my father's age, with grey hair tied at the back of his neck and growing a short beard. He walks in carrying Marin's notes in his hands. I had been sitting here for 3 days now, waiting for her to wake up. At least now, she had a bit more color about her. He checks the charts on the end of her bed before hooking another bag of something to her drip. "She is doing much better. I suppose she has you to thank for that. Although she would heal a lot faster if you marked her," Doc says to me. "I know you don't want to mark her against her will. But Alpha, I am sure given the circumstance, she would understand," Doc says when I go to protest. "You said she is doing better," I tell him, and he nods. "She is, but she isn't out of the woods yet. You know how Forsaken bites go. 1 minute they are fine, then the next, he doesn't finish, instead, looking at Marin worriedly. I scrub my hands down my face before rubbing my eyes that felt like sandpaper. What of Emily? I asked. Scouts scoured the area for her son but found no sign of him. We don't even know where she came from. Nothing made sense, and we had zero leads. She isn't doing so well, I am not sure she will make it. We had to amputate one of her legs already, Doc tells me, and I sigh. Also, Marin's mother keeps ringing the hospital, Alpha John also has rang to check on her, my brows furrowed. For years they wanted nothing to do with her, and now, suddenly, they gave a? What did you tell them? I ask him. Nothing, of course, they aren't on her list of emergency contacts, but... But what? They are her parents, Alpha. Maybe you should let them know. You should probably go home too. I will ring if anything changes or if she wakes up. I look over at Marin, still unconscious. The thought of leaving made my stomach turn. And think about what I said about marking her. She isn't dying, but it would speed things up, Doc tells me, and I bite the inside of my lip and nod. If she was on the brink of death, I would take her wrath, yet I wondered if she would hate me if I just marked her to speed up the healing process. Valerian kept asking for her, and I had managed to shield him away from what was really going on, but that would only last so long before he demanded to see her. Getting up, my back cracks, and I stretch, having been in that chair for days now. I walk over to her bedside, running my fingers up her arm. Sparks zap at my fingers from the bond and goosebumps rose on her arms from my touch. Forgive me, I whisper, leaning down and cupping the back of her neck. I kiss her lips and tilt her head to the side. Feeling my canines elongate, I sink them into her neck. Sparks rushed over my body everywhere, and I could taste the remnants of the poison in her blood, taste it on my tongue before I felt my chest thump erratically in my chest. My chest felt like it was expanding, the bond forging, and I felt the moment our souls entwined, her sleepy state rolling over me, and she M0ANED in her sleep. Even comatose, she had always reacted to my touch, but this was something else. A deep longing like she was fighting to come back to me, her worry for Valerian. So many things plagued her even whilst in this state, and I could feel everything that made her bleed into me. Marin completed me and filled a void I wasn't aware existed until I marked her. Moving her over on the bed, I climbed in beside her, not wanting to leave her side, hoping my warmth and our bond would be enough to rouse her awake while also praying she didn't want to kill me when she woke and realized I marked her without consent. But Doc was right, it would speed up her ability to heal, and she had our little boy waiting at home with my father for his mother to come home. I ended up falling asleep beside her, only to wake up when my phone started vibrating in my back pocket. There was no change in Marin. She still remained unconscious. Pulling my phone out, I yawned and glanced at the screen. My father was calling. Answering it, I held the phone to my ear. Yep, I asked him. We still weren't talking yet, I trusted no one more than my father with Valerian. He may be why my mother is dead, but he was a good father. And I knew he would protect my son with his life. Valerian wants to see his mother. Now don't be mad, but I have brought him to the hospital. We are downstairs, I growled. I didn't want Valerian to see her like this. Lucian, don't make my mistakes. Don't keep him from her, my father says. I would never make your mistakes, father, I tell him before telling him the room number. I hop off the bed, trying my best to cover her a little better and hide the tubes and needles in her veins. However, it was pointless. Nothing I did would shield him from her helpless state. Hearing a knock on the door, I open it to see my father. Valerian stood peering around him with frightened eyes. Glaring at my father. He shrugs. You shouldn't have brought him here, he looks terrified, I tell my father, reaching down for my son. He misses his mother and you. What else was I supposed to do? He refused to go to school until he saw her, he answers. I growl, turning to look at my son. His eyes peering over my shoulder at his mother, I step into the room, and my father follows, standing off to the side. See, she is all right, she is just sleeping, I tell Valerian, squeezing him tight. It felt like ages since I saw him last. When will she wake up? Valerian asks, kicking his legs to hop down. I place him on his feet and hesitantly walk over to her. His eyes wander over her, and he tries to climb on the bed with her. I sigh, grabbing him around the waist. Mummy has needles in her arms, you have to be careful, I want to lay with her, Valerian whines, clutching her blankets, and I look to my father. He presses his lips in a line and nods toward the bed. I take a breath. Okay, just let me move her around, but you to stay still, I tell Valerian, and he nods. I rearranged the cords and different devices attached to her, and my father helped me prop her up better, so she was kind of on her side. She didn't move an inch, which terrified me as we moved her around. I got nothing through the bond unless my skin touched hers briefly. Lifting Valerian up, he rolls on his side to face, sharing her pillow while my father and I try to untangle the cords attached to her hands. I ended up draping her arm over him, so the drip didn't kink. The trickiest part was moving her around and not ripping out the catheter. Somehow I managed it because that would have been embarrassing being scolded by the doctor for moving her when I probably shouldn't. If you want to hop off, tell me, I tell him, but he snuggles down under the blanket with her, his finger tracing over her face. I sigh and fall back into the chair. Go, get a coffee and something to eat. I will sit with them, my father says, and my eyes go to my son, who was whispering to his mother to wake up. With a nod, I get up when Valerian speaks. You marked her, he asks, sitting up on his elbow and glancing down at the wound on her neck. He brushes her hair back to look at it better before sniffing her. She smells like us now, Valerian beams. Officially part of our big village, Mama, he says, sniffing her again. So that means we come live with you now? Valerian asks, his eyes lighting up. Let's just see what happens when your mother wakes up, Valerian nods before prodding her mark with his finger as if he could rub it off. Why do we have to bite them to mark our mates? I don't want to bite Casey. She would probably taste like a troll, Valerian says, pulling a face. Casey? I ask him, and he shrugs before his little cheeks heat. I think the little man has a crush, my father announces with a chuckle. I do not pop, Valerian says, giving him a glare and pursing his lips angrily. Then why would you say you didn't want to bite Casey because she would taste like a troll? I laugh. Because she will be my mate, Valerian announces, and I scratch the back of my neck awkwardly. But what if she isn't? I ask him. But she is my best friend, but so is Taylor. I don't want to bite them and get girl germs, he says, confused. Well, lucky for you, you don't have to bite anyone anytime soon, I tell him, and my father chuckles. But aren't mates our best friends? Yes, in a sense. But not all mates grow up together, Valerian. Casey and Taylor may have someone else for a mate, I try to explain. No, I am their best friend. They can't have another boy as a best friend, Valerian growls, startling me. I thought you said Casey was annoying. I laughed. She is messy, so is Taylor, Valerian states. I laughed, turning to my father. Can I have 2 mates? Valerian asks. Have fun, I laughed, ditching him with the awkward questions. But, my father complains, looking like he also wanted to bail out with me. I will bring you back coffee, I tell him, laughing as I duck out of the room. Heading to the cafeteria, I order something to eat, grabbing Valerian and my father, something too. Waiting in the small cafeteria, I heard my name get called and go to the counter to retrieve the bag and cup tray. Turning around, I sigh when I see John and Ava looking out of place in my pack hospital. Chapter 76. Pressing my lips in a line, I walked over to them, where they were harassing the receptionist. Why are you in my territory? I snap at him, and he turns his attention away from the girl behind the counter that looks relieved. Your doctors wouldn't answer my questions, and one hung up on my wife, John says, pointing an accusing finger at me. Your point being? She is our daughter, he snarled. What, now she is your daughter because you had no issues disowning her? I snap at him, and he glares at me. Leave. I tell him, and he growls. Ava grips my arm, and I pull mine away. Please, she says, and I look at her. I know Marin didn't have issues with her sister, hurt by the fact she never continued their relationship, but she didn't blame Ava. Her father. However, she had washed her hands of after what he did. You can come to see her. You remain here, I tell her father, who growls before Ava looks up at him. Please, Dad, he sighs. I raise an eyebrow at him to see if he would challenge me on this, but he nods to her, and I tell her the room number before she goes to duck up the stairs. Give this to my father and son, I tell her, giving her the paper bag and 1 coffee. She nods quickly, taking it and heading up to see her sister. Sipping my coffee, John stalks off to the cafeteria and orders his own. I received a text from my father asking if it was all right that Ava just got there or if he should make her leave. I replied that it was fine and that I would back up soon before placing my phone in my pocket. I'm not here looking for trouble, Lucian, John says when I come up behind him. Good, because if you are, you just found it, I tell him. He glares at the barista, who rushes around quickly, making his coffee. Why are you here? I ask him. She is my daughter, you didn't care that she was your daughter when she fell pregnant with my son, I tell him, pulling a chair out at a nearby table. The barista hands him his coffee, and he pulls out the other. The entire cafeteria falls silent, and I look around to find it empty except for the barista, who stood staring wide-eyed at us, sitting at a table together. Tell me the real reason, or leave. I will drop Ava back at your borders later, and who let you cross? I ask him. Nobody, I just drove in. You dropped your border patrols, remember, for the rogues, he says, and I had forgotten entirely. I nod, sipping my coffee and sitting back in my chair. I could tell he was uncomfortable. I won't let you ruin her again, I tell him. I didn't ruin her. You did. She was a good kid, I had no issues with her growing up until you got your filthy hands on her, he snarled. Yet you have no issues trying to palm your other daughter off to me, so what is it you want? Nothing, I am just here to check on her. I don't believe you, I tell him, pinching the bridge of my nose. There it is. You aren't here to check on Marin at all. You want something, I tell him. Your father and I had a deal, he broke it, A deal for what? I marry Ava. Then what? We have an alliance, that's what. My brows furrow at his words. I don't buy it, you're hiding something, I argue. John sighs, scrubbing a hand down his face. How is she? He asked, drinking from his cup. Alive, and now marked, so she is awake. I shake my head. No, not yet, I answer, leaning forward and bracing my arms on the table. I scratched my beard that was growing. I felt dirty but actually didn't mind how it looked. Though as soon as I got my hands on a razor, it was going. The other girl, Emma, Emery, he asks, and I could see he was trying to make small talk. Emily? I ask. Yes, that one, she lost a leg, and they aren't sure she will make it. Emily isn't strong enough to fight off the infection. She never found her mate. John asks. She is rogue. What do you think? I know she is rogue, gouged. I'm just saying she might stand a chance if she had one, John snapped at me. As far as I know, she hasn't, and since when do you care about rogues? I ask. I don't, he says, folding his arms across his chest and staring at me. His eyes run over me before they flick away. You look like, he says. And you look old, time to retire, don't you think? I retort, and John scoffs. This is the last time I am asking, you don't answer, you can leave. Why are you really here, John? He scowled before looking at me. It scared me seeing her like that, I thought they killed her, John says. And where is your wife, Claire? I ask him, and he looks at the table. Staying with her friend, we had an argument, he says. Over Marin, he nods. So what you thought, coming here would patch things up with your mate? No, yes, but no. I just wanted to make sure Marin is all right, because now you realize she isn't a rogue. I ask him. How was I supposed to know? He snarled at me, gripping the edge of the table. That is one thing I don't get, I tell him, watching the man that is supposed to be my father-in-law. What? He asks. Since finding her and my son, what I don't get as a father is how you could look at your own flesh and blood, the child you raised, and turn your back on her like she meant nothing. Turf her out and abandon her, I would kill for my kid. There is no way I would abandon him, I snap at him. You don't know what you are talking about, I was protecting her, he snarls. Protecting her? Are you serious? She was living in her car with a newborn baby, choosing between food for herself and diapers. Don't give me that C-rap, John. I tell him before standing up. You are excuse for a father and a man, I spit at him before turning to leave. Because you are such a great one yourself. You didn't even know Valerian existed for how long, Lucian, and what of your father? Perfect example there after what he did to your mother, John sneers, and I stop turning back to face him. The mother that raised your daughter when you refused to. My father knows. At least he admits it and is trying to make up for it. You just look elsewhere to blame, and me. I wish every gosh day I was there, even if she wasn't my mate. I would have taken her as one had I known her or known she had my son. John curses, shaking his head. You see her as your biggest shame, John, when you should have seen her as your daughter and for who she is. Because you are suddenly an expert on my daughter. She wasn't some sweet, innocent little girl. She got herself knocked up, he said. You're right, she got herself knocked up with my help. It takes two people to create a baby, John, so why are the women only punished for it? It is sickening, but as much as I hate you for what you did, I suppose I should thank you also, I tell him, and he scoffs. For what? Because she turned out great in spite of you, you showed her what not to do, and I can't wait for her to bring this city to God's knees, I growl. Ha, ha. You fool, you may own half this city, Lucian, but Marin wouldn't know the first thing about running a pack, a business, yes, but a pack. She was rogue. Ava would have. John tries to argue. Ava is not my mate, and I would never choose her over Marin. And a pack. You. Her pack outnumbers all of ours. Great, now I have heard it all. John laughs. Your numbers are only 300 or 400 bigger than mine. You may have more people, but I have alliances you don't have, Lucian. Think with your head, John snaps, standing up. Try L000 more than yours, John. You want to go to war over me refusing to marry Ava, so be it, but you won't win, and I will gladly watch her destroy you, take everything from you. You do not know what you have done. War, you have seen nothing of the war that will be headed our way. You need my pack, John tells him. What war? I don't need an alliance with you because I have Marin's, they will fight alongside mine. You are forgetting something, John. Marin isn't just an alpha. She was also rogue. I have come to realize that they have more guts than any pack I have known, including my own. They band together, forced to survive and rely on each other, I tell him, stepping closer. The rogue population outnumbers any pack when banded together, and guess who just opened their borders up? Guess who has her army, and she didn't even realize it. Marin does, John laughs. They're rogues, Lucian, pull your head out of you. She can't control them. She doesn't need to control them, John. They are family. Marin has done more for the rogues than any alpha has in this city, so when push comes to shove, who do you think they will stand behind an alpha? I laughed. No, they will fight for the woman that gave them a fighting chance? Do you think she isn't alpha material? She has her own land. That hotel is solely owned by her. Marin didn't just build a business, she built a pack. She has more members than any of us. Now last I checked pack counts, my pack is the largest at 847. The rogue population is well over 1,000, means nothing, Lucian, and you know it. Unless she can get those laws changed, nothing in this city will change. Your merry band of rogue wants to stand behind you, more fool them, it's a quick way to become forsaken, he says, and I stop. He laughed as I turned back to face him. You forget, any rogue that steps out of line receives instant banishment. They are already the dregs of society. Her being your Luna won't change that. You own half the city, but you don't own the council. It will never pass in the courts. Marin would be attempting the impossible. This city doesn't want things to change, she won't succeed. All she will do is start a war she can't win. John claims. She will win, John. I know Marin, she won't give up until she does, I tell him when Ava comes back down. I turn to look over my shoulder. She had tears in her eyes. Marin, is okay, she. Ava shakes her head before glaring at her father. This is your fault, she snaps at him. John growls at her words. Get in the car. You don't speak to me like that, John snaps at her, and she shakes her head at him before stalking off, leaving me with John. Tell Marin to ring her mother when she wakes up, John says, and I nod. He turns to walk away, then pauses. And tell her I stopped by, I meant what I said, Lucian. War is coming. Make sure you aren't on the wrong side of it, he says before walking off. I stared after him, wondering what he was talking about. Chapter 77. Going back to the room, I find Valerian was tucked in beside his mother. The blanket pulled high under his chin. My father was still seated beside the bed and he held a finger to his lips, pointing to the bed, and I nodded. What was that about? My father asked as I dropped into the chair beside him. John and I have no idea. Something is going on with him, though. He kept talking about some impending war, I tell him, and his brows furrow. I will ask around, see if I can find anything out, I nod, and he sighs. Do you want me to take Valerian? I glance at the bed where Valerian lay and shake my head. No, I will take him home with me later, you head home, I tell him, despite not wanting to leave Marin. Our son needed me, and I knew she would like one of us with him. Lucian, Not now. I growl. I didn't want to talk about him betraying my mother and not here in front of my son, even if he was asleep. He closes his mouth and nods, getting up. Ring if you need anything or want me to take him, but it will probably be good if he stays with you, he hasn't been sleeping well. My father before he leaves, and I sit back in my chair. After an hour or so, my eyes grew heavy, and I kept nodding off. Yawning, I get to my feet to find Valerian still asleep with his mother only now. Marin was stirring, her nose crinkling, and I felt her consciousness slowly coming back as she sniffed our son. I was going to take him home, but as I watched her, maybe he was what she needed to wake up, so instead, I moved him closer to her before climbing in beside her and pulling Valerian on my chest. I placed his tiny hand on the side of her face. Her breathing evened out again. I kissed his little head, and he rubbed his face against my chest when I heard her inhale deeply, making me look over at her to see her hand move. She rubbed her eyes, her hand not doing what she wanted as it became tangled in the cords attached to her. Rolling on my side, Valerian slides between us, and I reach over and untangle her hand, making her eyes snap open. She looked really out of it, but her eyes cleared of their dreary state after a few seconds, and she lurched upright, her eyes going wide as she looked around the room. Gripping her shoulders, I push her back down. Emily, she gasps. Alive. She is down the hall, stay still. You just ripped out your cannula, I whisper, and she blinks, her heart rate slowing. She exhales, and I tug the cords away, the machine going berserk, and I lean over, hitting the button for the nurse before shutting the device to the drip off, knowing the nurse would fix it. Grabbing Marin's hand, I ran my tongue over where she ripped the needles and tap off, watching it heal before laying back down. Try not to move. You have cords everywhere and a catheter, which I am sure you don't want to be ripped out, I tell her. She nods, watching our son before brushing his hair with her fingers. Valerian stirs under her touch, and she leans forward, sniffing his little head. My heart leaped seeing her awake, and her eyes went to me behind him. You're forgiven, she smiles softly, and my brows furrow. At first, I thought she was talking about not getting to her fast enough until she touched her neck, and I let out a breath of relief. You forgive me? There was nothing to forgive. I should have let you when I marked you, but I heard you say it, I thought I dreamed it, she said, rubbing her eyes and yawning. How long has it been, she asks, her foggy mind becoming clearer and clearer by the second. A few days. Did you find the facility? Marin asked. I tilted my head to look at her better. That was the first time I heard about a facility. What facility? The one where Emily's son is, where she escaped from. She didn't tell you? Emily is in a coma, love, we haven't spoken with her, I will notify the patrols and send some scouts out. Did she say anything else? I asked when Valerian stirred and yawned. She shook her head. Marin smiled, watching him, burying her face in his neck and peppering his face with kisses. He pushes her face away and giggles before recognition hit him. Mum, he whispers and she smiles. He pounces on her, making her grunt. Careful, she is still sore, I tell him, gripping his waist, but Marin shakes her head, ignoring her discomfort as she hugs him tight. You're awake, Valerian murmurs, breathing in his mother's scent, and she nods. Valerian pulls his head from her neck and looks down at her. You need to brush your hair, he says, looking at her hair which was a mess on her head. Do I now? She asks and he nods. Can I wake up properly first? She laughed, and he nods. He looks at her neck and smiles. Daddy marked you, now you belong to him, Valerian beams, and I clear my throat, and Valerian looks at me while Marin shakes her head with a laugh. Pretty sure it's the other way around, I tell him. His brows pinch together. But you're the alpha, he says. Yes, when your mother lets me be, I chuckle. So Mum owns you? We belong to each other. No one owns anybody, Marin says with a shake of her head. But we can live with Dad now. Valerian asks, and I raise an eyebrow at her to hear her answer. What's it going to be, Luna? I mind-linked, and her eyes widen when my voice floats through her head, and I could feel how giddy she was being part of a pack link again. Yes, Uncle Dante is living with Aunt Zoe now, so it will be a little squishy, don't you think? Marin asks him, and Valerian beams with excitement and nods his head just as the nurse opens the door. Chapter 78. I noticed that the nurse was an older woman and was usually on the afternoon and night shifts. She pops her head in and sees Marin awake before looking at me. I will get the doctor, she says, smiling kindly before stepping back out when I nod to her. It took a few hours while Marin was checked over, but eventually, she was given the all-clear to head home. I had Dante bring her some clothes to get changed into. The doctor wanted her to stay an extra night for observations, but she wouldn't have it, wanting to go home, and refused to take no as an answer. By the time we got home, it was a little after 7 o'clock at night. We got Valerian McDonald's on the way home, but he fell asleep in the car, and I had to pry a chicken nugget from his fingers. Both Marin and I were shocked he even ate in the car, which proved how tired he was. Carrying him upstairs and inside, I tuck him in bed, stripping him down to his underwear and shirt as I tucked him in his bed before setting the night lights timer and closing the door. Going back out to the living room, Marin wasn't there when I heard the shower turn on, making me stop and head back to our room to find her in the ensuite. I came up behind her, placing my hands on her hips as she tested the water with her hand. Can I join you? I asked her, kissing her shoulder. She looks at me over her shoulder, and I cup her cheek before pressing my lips to hers. She answers my kiss instantly, her lips parting, and my tongue invades her mouth, dominating it as I kissed her hungrily. I wondered how angry she would be when she realized. I figured I would get it over with, not wanting to hide it from her. Ah, Marin. She cracks an eyelid open, a silly smile on her lips, the evidence of my release making her legs slick. I wasn't wearing anything, I figured that, she murmurs and yawns, and I expected her murderous rage, so I was surprised when she didn't seem that fazed. You could get pregnant. I offer, wondering if she heard me. I know how babies are made. I had one, but doubtful with all the drugs in my system at the moment. I would be lying if I said I didn't want to see her carrying my baby. One I missed out on with Valerian, so I kind of hoped she got pregnant but also knew the chances would be pretty slim like she said. Ah, my back. She whines as she stumbles back to the bathroom to finish her shower, making me chuckle. Chapter 79. Marin. The next morning I woke to a knee in the kidney, causing me to grunt as Valerian climbed into the bed. He weasels his way in between us before ripping Lucian's pillow out from under his head as he stole it. Lucian lurches upright, and I chuckle as Valerian wiggles closer to me, and I close my eyes. Ah, good. You're up. Can I have pancakes, please? Valerian whines at his father, who was awoken by the pillow thief. I am thanks to you, Lucian says, rubbing his eyes. I open my eyes to see Lucian groan and scrub a hand down his face, trying to wake up. Please, Dad, Valerian repeats, shaking his father's shoulder. What time is it? Lucian yawns. Breakfast time. Isn't your mother up? Lucian yawns, and I quickly close my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I did not want to get out of bed. Valerian rolls beside me, his fingers prying my eyes open, and I try not to smile as I fake sleep but notice his lips covered in chocolate. Leave her, let her sleep, Lucian says, hauling him out of bed while tapping Valerian's leg. Valerian stands on the bed before jumping off it and clinging to his father's back like a spider monkey, causing him to groan. Geez, what's got into you? Lucian whines. I want pancakes, but we need more chocolate chips. There is a packet in the fridge. I chuckle, knowing the evidence is on Valerian's face. Lucian turns, hearing me, and I quickly close my eyes again. I snuggled back under the blanket, trying to dive back into sleep. I was awoken from snuggling beneath the blankets when Lucian's voice whispered in my ear. Faker, I know you're awake, you just didn't want to get up, he says, jamming his fingers in my ribs, making me jump. Make sure you take an umbrella too. I heard on the radio a storm is headed our way, Lucian tells me and I groan. I am not going, I tell him, adding some fake coughs for dramatics. He tickles me, gripping the tops of my thighs through the blanket. Stop, stop. Okay, I am awake, I will go to work. I laughed when I heard feet rushing up the hall. Valerian called out for his father. I giggle, and Lucian rips the blanket up, climbing under and hiding behind me. What are you doing? I ask. Hiding from the hypo-demon spawn, he ate an entire bag of chocolate chips, and he made me iron his shirt twice. He is like OCD on steroids. Lucian growls, trying to lie as flat as possible behind me and failing. Valerian wanders into the room and peered around. Have you seen Dad? I point to the mound under the blanket beside me. I watch as he walks around the edge of the bed to my side before ripping the blanket back and looking at his father. My shoelaces don't match, Valerian says, looking down at his shoes. Lucian peering over the edge of the bed. They look fine to me, Lucian says, but Valerian looks at him expectantly, and I chuckle. Your mother will fix them, but Mum ties them funny, can you fix them, he says, pulling on his father's arm, and Lucian groans but climbs back out of bed. He bends down, fixing his shoelaces. They're better? No, that string is long now. Lucian's frustration came through the bond after the third attempt to fix his shoes before Valerian was finally happy enough about them. I glance at the alarm clock on the bedside table, knowing he would have to run him to school soon. Lucian lays back down and sighs. Ah, you gotta run him to school, I tell him. We still have half an hour, it's like a 5-minute drive at most, and don't you have work, he asks. I'm faking sick? Well, you better fake it better than your lame fake sleeping. You know it doesn't look good when the boss fakes sick, right? He mocks. Don't you have work to do? I ask him. Nope, Dad is handling it. You know it doesn't look good when the boss sends Daddy in to do his work for him, right? I asked, laughing to myself. I said I didn't have work to do. I never said I would not work, Lucian retorts before getting up and walking into the closet. I hear Lucian moving around in the closet before he walks out dressed in his suit and throws my uniform on the bed. Up, if I am working, so are you. I nearly died. Cut me some slack, nearly died, now up. I roll my eyes but haul myself out of bed before hopping in the shower. Halfway through washing my hair, Lucian comes in telling me he was running Valerian to school and he would see me tonight. I nod when he opens up the shower screen, the cold draft making me shiver as I try to wash the shampoo from my eyes. He grips my wrist, yanking me to him and pecking my lips. Dad! We are going to be late. Valerian calls out. Lucian laughs, letting me go while I blink through the soap before stepping back under the shower spray. Hold your horses, I am coming, and don't forget your raincoat, it is supposed to rain today, I hear him yell back as he walks out of the bathroom. I chuckle to myself and finish my shower before hopping out and drying myself. I had things I needed to do today or at least look into, so my first mission was stopping by the council chambers to see if I could petition to be heard in court, and then I needed to check up on Emily at the hospital. The day flew by quickly. It was overcast, and I thought the rain was coming. What I wasn't expecting was stepping out of the city council to a storm brewing and coming over fast. We hardly got storms here, but when we did, they were always terrible. Thick dark clouds rolled across the sky, the thunder rumbled loudly, and streaks of lightning lit up the heavy clouds above. Walking back to the car, the wind howled, whipping my hair across my face. Reaching my truck, it took nearly all my strength to close the door, the wind pushing against it. This storm was going to be a doozy, and I had to get back to the hotel. I needed to double-check the backup generators just in case and prepare to lock it down. Trees bent over with the wind as I drove toward work. The drive took longer when rain and hail belted down halfway home, the road barely visible, and the windscreen wipers struggled to clear the windscreen with the downpour. Pulling into the staff car park, a pool umbrella was flying across the car park. I mutter to myself while ripping the keys out of the ignition. I force my door shut before chasing after the thing, only to slip on the slick ground. Macy, I see, comes running out after the umbrella, and I got back to my feet soaking wet, my hair dripping. Go secure the pool area, I will get this. Macy called over her shoulder. Her blouse had turned see-through from the rain, her normally curly hair straight and dripping. I chuckled as she cursed the umbrella, chasing it down while I raced to the pool air, tossing the lightweight stuff in the garden shed behind the fence where we kept the pool supplies. Rushing back out of the pool area, I locked the fence. You never when someone would be stupid enough to try to go for a swim during a storm, and I didn't feel like scooping out a cooked werewolf in the morning. Locking the chain and padlock, I raced toward the restaurant. Macy came up behind me. Did you catch it? I asked. Nope, gave up after it tried to whisk me away like Mary Poppins, she says, wringing her out under the awning. I swing the door open and step inside, the warm welcoming. Macy shivers behind me. Geez, it came out of nowhere, she says, shaking her head. One cleaner comes over to us, handing us some towels, and I try to dry myself as best I can. Walking out the back to the kitchen, I looked for Zoe, but she wasn't anywhere to be found. Turning to the head chef, she was chopping potatoes. "Amy, have you seen Zoe?" I ask her. She looks up from her station, her red hair in a hairnet and her chef hat sagging to one side. She said she wasn't feeling well and went to lay down before the afternoon rush. I look at Macy behind me, and she shrugs. She was in here before I went out there. I will go check on her. You all right to check the generators, or do you want me to on my way back? I ask her. I'll do the generators, you can check the functions room door is locked. She laughs, and I glare at her. That was a 30-meter dash with no shelter. She laughs, sauntering out, and I shake my head, heading for the restaurant's rear exit. Trying to force myself to brave the storm, I take a breath and run like mad for the functions room, cutting through the gardens and making a beeline for the building at the end of the property. All the doors were wide open, and I quickly raced around and shut them before flicking the lights off. The wind had carried leaves and debris inside the place, and it would need to be cleaned tomorrow. After checking everything was secure, I raced back to the main building before detouring for my and Zoe's apartment. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time and burst through the door. Well, that's my cardio for the day, I thought. My shoes squelched and screeched on the floors. I could hear a groaning sound coming from somewhere up the hall, and I quickly kicked my shoes off, searching for Zoe and the strange noise. Stepping into the hallway, I turned toward her room, but her door was open and the room empty. Sniffing the air, I picked up her scent, but gosh, it was strong. Approaching the bathroom door, I knock softly, hearing a whimper on the other side. "Zoe!" I murmur, listening. She didn't answer, but she sounded like she was in pain. "Zoe, I am coming in," I tell her, gripping the doorknob. I twist and push the door open to find Zoe laying on the cold tiles, a towel wrapped around her like she just climbed out of the shower. Stepping in, I rush to her side and kneel next to her. "Zoe?" I ask, gripping her arms and rolling her on her back. Her skin was hot to touch, her face flushed and cheeks rosy red like she had a fever, and her scent was sickly sweet. "Marin, I don't feel too good." "Get Dante," she murmured, her eyes fluttering before she jolted upright and scrambled for the toilet. Zoe threw up before hugging the toilet bowl. "Ah, I feel like, I think I may have that stomach bug," Zoe whines. I touch her head, her skin is sweltering hot. "No, I don't think you have a bug, Zoe. I think you're in heat," I tell her. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I dial Dante's number when the lights flickered before the power suddenly goes out. "Great, just great." Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.